Hello and welcome to another episode of Rewilding Voices with me, Jane McDowell. And this is the podcast where I get to talk to the change makers, the visionaries, and the heroes who are helping us to live kinder lives, kinder to ourselves, to others, and to the planet. And today I'm really excited because I'm here with Becky Barnes. She is an award-winning stylist and she specializes in helping women to feel amazing without having to ruin the planet doing it. So, Becky, tell us a bit more about yourself.
Thank you for having me, Jane. Well, yeah, that is my job. I work as a sustainable stylist. So the stylist bit basically means helping women feel confident in their own skin, using colour and clothes as a tool to achieve that. And the sustainable bit means doing all of the aforementioned in a way which is treading as lightly as possible on the planet.
Yeah, awesome. So tell me, because I know that you help lots of women and you take them shopping to charity shops and make them look amazing in clothes that have already been loved and made, and we're not sort of having to go down the route of fast fashion and building up more landfill, etc., everywhere else. But how did you get into this? Because you were in the fashion industry already, and then you really sort of changed your view, didn't you? So was there like a pivotal moment that made you just think, hang on a minute, what are we all doing here? Like,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I haven't even always done this job. So this is a second career. So I'm now coming up to my 10-year anniversary. But for the 20 years prior to that, I had a very traditional corporate career and sort of like went up through the ranks until I reached burnout and the realization that somebody else's version of success wasn't mine. So I just walked
mm,
away from all of that and just wanted to empower women, which was why my business was born. And at that point, the environment just really wasn't on my agenda at all. But thankfully, very quickly into my journey of my second career, I met an eco designer and she basically opened Pandora's box for me and said, look, this is the reality. And it was such a shock because I had no idea up until this point. I did not make the connection at all between clothes and the environment. But then once that kind of the lid was off, there was no going back. And because we're small businesses, we can change and pivot quickly. So that's exactly what I did. Once I found out the impact, I wanted to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And so changed the way I started talking about clothes and the way I operate. And thankfully, touching wood, uh, we're still here.
yeah, marvelous. So what was this woman doing in particular that was kind of that blew your mind, basically, other than that obviously you took on board all the stats and the information, which can be quite alarm well, they are alarming. It's not
Mm.
can be, they are very alarming. So what was she doing in particular that made you sit up?
Well, she's called Linda Thomas. She's an eco designer. She used to scour the charity shops for luxury fabrics such as cashmere and silk, but she looked for the pieces that were not perfect. So the bits that was really going to buy because it needed some work. And then she would gather them all up and then figure out which bits she could use and then piece together these beautiful one-off creations. And I couldn't understand why she was just going to so much effort. I was like, if you want to make somebody a dress, just go and buy a length of fabric. And then she started uncovering the truth. And then that really set me off down a path because I literally knew nothing
Mm.
about that side of things. So I paused on my own buying behavior. So I had a year of not buying anything new. I asked my community if anyone wanted to join me, and over 100 women thought they were up for the challenge as well. So came along for the ride. And also during that time, I just studied, I became accredited, I did lots of research, spoke to lots of people in this space. And really, by the end of that year, I was so convinced that there was no other way and that I had to try and do something that's the way it's been ever since.
Yeah. So you say you went a whole year without buying anything new. And I have to confess that I am um, a recovering um, a recovering shopaholic, I would say. When I was in my 30s, I would think nothing about spending 8 hours in a department store and just buying here, there, and everywhere. And I was never at the point where I had loads of clothes in my wardrobe that still had the labels on and never got worn, but I did love to go and buy something new, kind of made me feel good. So, how was it for you to then? Because I'm assuming you were maybe not quite as bad as I might have been back then, but that it was kind of usual for you. So, how was it to suddenly go a year without buying anything new?
Well, I probably was as bad as you, Jane, because, I love shopping. And like
Mm,
shopping was my kind of crutch, really, I suppose. I would shop to reward myself. I would shop if I was sad. I would shop if I was bored, like shopping
yeah,
was
I
my
do.
go-to activity. And
Mm,
I would shop anywhere and everywhere. So I've always been a massive second-hand shopper, I suppose. And that started right back in when I was at primary school. My second favorite day of the year, because my first favorite day was Christmas Day. My second favorite day of the year was the Scouts jumble sale in the little village in Devon I grew up in.
oh,
And I think that's triggered something in me because I just loved just, I don't know, wading in all the colours and textures and fabrics and being able to get hold of clothes to experiment with at a really low cost. But so I would shop there and car boot sales, department stores, anywhere, it was all fair game. So when I did my year of not buying anything new, I should qualify that it was not buying anything from brand new.
yeah.
So I could still access things that were secondhand. But really, that year showed me that by not buying brand new, I wasn't compromised in any way, shape, or form. Whatever you want, basically, you can find it. And particularly now, we've got apps such as Vinted that have made the search for secondhand items so much more accessible. So for me, like secondhand is definitely not second best. And saying goodbye to buying things brand new was so easy for me to do.
Mm. Yeah, I'm intrigued by the whole vintage thing because I have to confess I keep saying I'm confessing it's not doing anything wrong. I've got a vintage account where I sell some stuff, and it was brought to my it might have been one of your posts a while ago, Becky. There was a kind of a discussion about whether vintage is a good thing or not so good thing in that it seems to be taking all the good quality stuff away from the charity shops. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thought is exactly that. So, having spent almost the last 9 years exclusively in secondhand shops, I think I've got a pretty good handle on what I see and what I find on the rails.
Mm,
And unquestionably, the quality of items in charity shops has decreased.
okay.
No two ways about that. And I think that is because we are in a cost of living crisis. If people are looking to find money or, get a little bit back wherever they can, then Vinted poses that opportunity for them. If they're clearing out, their first option will be, let's see if I can sell it. And then if they can't sell it, maybe then it ends up in the charity shop. And that won't
Yeah.
be the case for everybody because some people are still donating firsthand and they're just not even trying to sell in the first place.
Mm,
But definitely my experience is the quality has decreased. And in the charity shops as well, we're also seeing now a massive increase in the ultra fast fashion brands. So the likes of Shein and Temu, they just didn't used to exist a few years ago, but
mm.
they've rapidly just grown. And because their clothes aren't great, I think maybe people buy them because they're cheap, they wear them once. And then because they don't associate any value with it, they just pass it on.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there's so much of that on the rails.
Because can you describe to any viewers or listeners who haven't really been down this rabbit hole and looked at the cost of fashion to the environment with people like Shein and Temu and other sort of fast fashion outlets? Can you give us a flavour of what damage they're doing to the environment?
Oh, it's such a big question. And it's sort of, we have to look at it from cradle to grave, really, because there's an impact all the way along from like manufacturing through to end of life. So if you go right at the beginning, then we need raw materials of some kind. So it might be natural materials like cotton or wool or hemp or silk, or it might be synthetic materials like polyester, which essentially comes from oil. But both sides of the coin are taking resources that are produced here on Earth. And it's okay to do that, but the rate at which we're using those raw materials is so rapid. Like in a 6 year period up to I think it was 2024, we used as many resources in that 6 year period as we did in the entire 100 years that preceded that.
Wow.
So our use of resources has just skyrocketed. So we've got that, we've got the use of raw materials. Along the way, we're also using water. So fashion is the second largest polluter of water across the world. It's also some crops are incredibly intensive using water. And it's curious because I think we live on a blue planet. 70% of Earth's surface is covered in water. So we sort of think we've got lots of it.
Mm.
In terms of fresh water, the water that we can actually drink, that equates to about 3% of the water that's on the earth. So there's not a lot of it, and yet we're pouring loads of it into crops and manufacturing and dyeing, etc. Also, when we've got our raw materials and then we're turning it into something, we're using energy, we're using chemicals, we're emitting carbon. Then when we've made the materials, which we're turning into clothes. We're quite often exploiting people who are making
Mm.
it. There's about 75 million garment workers around the world. Most of them won't be paid a fair wage, and most of them will be in really horrible conditions, working conditions. So there's that impact. We then have the impact of waste because the fashion model, regardless of whether it's a high end or fast fashion or ultra fast, works in a sort of three-stage process. And I don't know how they make the numbers add up this way, but it is. They plan on selling a third of what's produced at full price, a third at a reduced price. So that's all the stuff you see in the sales. And
Yeah.
a third never gets sold at all.
So what happens to that third?
It goes to landfill. Increasingly, some things are ending up in charity shops. So some brands, for example, Zara have teamed up with the Red Cross. Mint Velvet have teamed up with 10 of Us. But again, that's not a solution. They need to be making less in the first place because if you think about we're making over 100 billion items a year, if we've got two-thirds are being sold at full or half price, a third of 100 billion is still a lot of clothes that's got to go somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And then even with the clothes that are sold, at some point, somebody will be done with them. They may go into a charity shop, they may be sold. Lots of them just go in the bin. Even the ones that go to charity shops, only around 15 to 20% go on to be sold, and the rest are then deemed rags. And whilst the charity shops used to get a good price for those rags, that has just diminished so much. And even in some cases, charity shops are now having to pay to take their rags away. So there's no value in it.
Mm.
Do those rags go? Typically the global south, they can't cope with them. For example, Ghana imports around 15 million items a week from us. They can't possibly resell that many. So it's
Yeah.
ended up in their landfills, which then end
Yeah.
up in their seas. So every single step of the way, there's an impact with our clothes, which is
Yeah.
a nightmare if, like you and I, we like shopping and we like our clothes. So it's like, okay, so how can we still do that? How can we still get joy from our clothes and for it to be a really positive experience, trying to minimize all those horrible bits along the way?
Yeah. Yeah. Any suggestions, Becky?
Well, I do think for me, well, lots of people just want one answer. They're like, just tell me what I need to do. What is the one
Yeah.
thing I need to do? And there is no one thing. There are many, many, many different things that we can all do. So the point is find something that you could feel that you can do without you feeling compromised. But the three main things you can do, and it comes down to a quote from the lovely late great Dame Vivienne Westwood. She says, buy less, choose well, make it last.
Yeah.
Those three things, even if you just pick one of them, will stand you in really good stead. So buy less. How many items do you think the average person in the UK buys a year?
Oh, goodness.
Put
Well,
you on the spot now, Jane. Just
yeah.
like
So
mastermind.
I'm thinking that right now I'm probably not typical of the average. I think I was a few years ago. So if I go by my ex habits, I would say, let's say a year, maybe 150.
Ooh, yeah, you were a big shopper, weren't you? That's
Well,
that's about 3 items a week.
I was thinking it was about 2 items a week, but that shows you how bad my maths is.
Yeah, if we work on a 52-week year, a couple of items a week, just over 100 items.
Yeah.
So you were probably at the top end, but the average shopper is buying around 75 items a year.
Mm, yeah.
There's a body called the Hot and Cold Institute who are very clever scientists who work out if we're going to stay within our planetary boundaries, if we're going to stick within what our planet can tolerate, each person should limit their number of new items to just 5 per year.
Yeah. When you say five, is that like is one of those items a pair of shoes or is two of those items shoes?
I would say one of those would be a pair of
Right.
shoes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I don't include underwear in that as well because I think that's kind of, that's slightly different. This is about items of clothing because, and the rationale for limiting it to this is because we are extracting and using as if it's never going to run out. But if we continue as we are, we're going to need another 2.5 planets. We
Wow.
don't have another 2.5 planets, so we have to stick with what we have, which means everyone needs to massively reduce what they're buying. So
Yeah.
the first thing is buy less. Second thing, choosing well.
Yeah. It's the key, isn't it? Like I said, I wasn't one of those people that bought things and left them in the wardrobe and never wore them. Although there are definitely a few things that I didn't wear very often, but I think it's quite common for people to buy stuff and still have the labels on them a year later in the wardrobe. And so I guess that whole, like we were saying earlier, the whole compunction to go shopping if you're feeling a bit low or you just want to, give yourself a treat or it's really how we think about ourselves and our place on the planet, isn't it? And the consequences of our actions. So rather than maybe like, oh, I'll just go and treat myself to some new outfits because I'm feeling a bit low or I just want to treat myself. What else can I do to celebrate life? Maybe plant a tree or, that's kind of, yeah,
It's exactly that. And it's also just about asking, do I really need it?
yeah,
Getting curious, looking at the label, what's it made of? How has it been made? Is it supporting a company that really cares about these things, or am I just fueling this machine? Do I love it? Does it go with the other things I've got? Am I going to love it in 5, 10, 15 years, or is
yeah,
it going to be a flash in the pan? All these things are relevant questions to ask yourself about
yeah.
choosing better.
Yeah, I do have this rule now that if I don't absolutely love it, then I'm not buying it.
Yeah.
And I think that's put me in good stead. Although sometimes I look at my wardrobe now and think, oh, something feels like it's missing. But then, you just sort of dig around and put things together a little less obviously, and you find new outfits out of what you've got. I did that the other day. I kind of put on like because autumn is coming and it felt a bit kind of autumnal, so I had like a burgundy polo neck on, and I thought I just want some orange. Oh, but my orange jumper was in the wash, so then I found a little kind of summery yellow top that I just put over the top of it, and the yellow and the burgundy just went together really well. I was like, oh, so yeah, it's just a question of trying to make something new out of what you've already got.
It's exactly that. So one of the services I offer is a shopping in your own wardrobe, sort of an outfit builder session, because typically we only wear around 20% of our wardrobe. So there's a massive amount of our wardrobe that doesn't really see the light of day because we've got our favorites and we go back to those and wear those on high rotation. So it's when you have a fresh pair of eyes come in and see, as you did, what combinations can I put together in a new way so that it feels fresh, it feels like I've got something new. And actually, through the process of doing that creative restyling, rethinking, you get the same dopamine hit as if you were to go out and buy something new.
Yeah,
So it's the same physiological response you're having in your brain, but the impact on the planet is so much less because you're working with what you've already got.
yeah, yeah. You touched on something a few minutes ago about looking at the label and seeing what it's made of and checking out the manufacturer and the company and their kind of ethics and values. Which brings me on to a question that I always have around, do you go for the cotton, organic cotton, or do you go for the polyester? Because like you said at the beginning, the to produce the cotton, obviously if it's organic cotton, it's not quite so intensively farmed, but the whole process of turning it into cotton and dyeing it and all the rest of it, as opposed to using oil based stuff and making polyester. I've heard both sides of the argument for, and I've never really been able to fathom out what would be kinder to the planet. And maybe there isn't a right or wrong. What are your views on it, Becky?
Nothing is ever really black and white in this situation. It's all very grey. What I would say about natural fibres, so your cottons and your linens, etc., is particularly if they've been grown in an organic way, that can end up being actually quite regenerative if in the farming sense. So, and I guess the other really good thing about that is at end of life, if it were to ever end up in landfill, it will biodegrade. There will be no trace that it's ever been there. It
Yeah.
will just go, it's come from the soil and it will go back to the soil. If you're talking about polyester, and I do think there is a place for plastic in this world, for example, if you're looking at waterproofing, then actually plastic's a pretty good option and it will last you a long, long time. The issue we have with plastic and polyester is one, the amount of oil it's using in the first place. So if you imagine an Olympic-sized swimming pool, one of those is drained every 25 minutes to support the fashion industry. So we're using a ton of oil every 25 minutes. Every time we wash those items, they're releasing microplastics. And even when we wear them, it's releasing microplastics without even washing it. And then at end of life,
Mm.
if it goes to landfill, it takes hundreds of years to break down, but it never truly goes away. It just breaks down into smaller pieces
Mm.
and smaller pieces. So I would always come out on the side of natural, if possible, organic or recycled natural. So recycled wool, recycled cotton.
Yeah.
But it's really difficult, because people have got really good at greenwashing. So,
Yeah.
greenwashing being companies using marketing tactics, selling the fact that they're doing something good when really they're not.
Yeah.
So bamboo would be a really good example of that.
Mm.
Many people went out and bought bamboo socks because they thought that's a good thing for the planet. It's not. Bamboo for furniture, bamboo for flooring, excellent. Bamboo for clothes, no, because the process it has to go through is so intensive, using so many chemicals, that it is not a great crop at all for that.
Wow. Because I remember, I think probably about 10 years ago or so, it was just everywhere, bamboo t-shirts, bamboo sock, just, yeah, it seemed like, oh, this is the new magic way forward
Yeah.
to, yeah, to
And we,
make,
and we all bought into it. And this is the frustrating thing about it. You almost have to not take anything at face value and do a little bit of research into it. And it's the same with like recycled plastic. There seems to be this swathe of recycled plastic in terms of clothing and bedding that I've seen on the market. And on the face of it, you think, well, isn't that good? Because in my mind, I go, right, it's recycled polyester. So they've taken all the old polyester and they've somehow turned it into new polyester. That is not what's happening. How they're making it is they're taking old plastic bottles. and they're turning that into new polyester.
Yeah, that whole
So,
chain needs to be addressed, doesn't it? Like,
well, it's just challenging.
why are there plastic bottles for water? I mean, just for God's sake. Anyway.
Yeah, and the challenge is if we have the plastic bottles, they can be recycled about 6 or 7 times into other plastic bottles. If we take a plastic bottle and we turn it into fabric, that's the end of the line. It can't go anywhere else after that. So I think it's a very sort of short-term solution. I
Yeah,
don't even think it's a great solution.
yeah. What sort of garments are being made from recycled plastic, Becky? I'm really.
All sorts, loads and loads of clothes. There will be loads of like acrylic type jumpers that have come from plastic bottles. I've seen loads of bedding, and when I walked through Marks and Spencer's that they were bragging about it was recycled plastic. Yeah, all sorts.
It's just, I don't know. My first reaction would be that would be horrible to have your skin next to you, be all sweaty. Is that
Well, yeah, it is. I mean, for any synthetic, which is poly based, you're essentially wearing plastic, which means it's non-breathable.
mm, yeah,
Yeah, so it's not great, particularly if you're prone to having personal summers.
yeah,
One of my age is.
mm, yeah, yeah. I'm gonna throw maybe a bit of a curveball into the conversation because I recently read a book called Our Oaken Bones. It's by a guy called Merlin Hanbury Tennyson, and he lives on a farm in Cornwall, and part of the land is what's remaining of the temperate rainforest. And he's very much trying to regenerate the temperate rainforest in that area. And he was talking about the sheep industry. So, as you know, Cornwall's, covered in sheep grazing over, acres and acres of land. And yet there seems to be So it seems to be an unsustainable way of life to be a sheep farmer these days, in that you're just not making any money. And one of the shocking things was that he said that for every sheep that's sheared, the farmer only gets 25 pence for the fleece. And I'm thinking, well, this is crazy. We've got this natural resource right here. I think I saw someone else's post on Instagram the other day that's showing the density of sheep farming across Europe. And the UK and the British Isles were just like the densest place in the whole of Europe for sheep farming. And yet, so we've got this huge natural resource that we don't seem to be using. Do you have any idea of why we're not making use of the wool, or is it something that you know about? Maybe you don't. So, like I say, it's a bit
Um,
of a curveball.
no, it's not a curveball at all because it comes up a lot actually, and it's such an untapped resource because wool is a natural fiber. If you're rearing that livestock, you've got it anyway. But the bottom's fallen out of the market, and I think it's because the demand isn't there. And I think it's because the demand is driven by cost, which means it's much cheaper just to go with the oil-based ones than it would be to process that wool. And it's such a shame because wool is incredible. It's incredibly warm. It can be waterproof. It's self-cleansing. It will biodegrade. Yet the bottom's fallen out of it because no one wants to manufacture with it.
But when you consider the price of oil, you think, and the finite amount of oil that there is, we're kind of getting to the end of what's usable, really. It just doesn't make any sense that no one is saying, okay, we've got this huge resource in these islands that we live on. Why aren't we making use of it? And how can we maybe subsidize it, or get some funding in to get the industry off the ground? Because I mean, literally for centuries and centuries in the UK anyway, in the British Isles, geographically speaking, we've been wearing wool and it's served us really well. And yeah, it just seems a no-brainer to carry on using it if you're going to carry on sheep farming. And of course, that's a whole other question around whether we should be farming sheep or not. But yeah, just it seems nuts to me that we're just throwing away this natural resource where and people are using oil-based fabrics to create fashion.
I
And
totally
like,
agree.
yeah,
None of this really makes sense to me. I'm like, why wouldn't you use it? Why are we overproducing by 30 billion items a year? Why is so much stuff going into landfill? Why don't we recycle more stuff? Less than 1% of all textiles in the world are recycled into other textiles. We're just missing so many tricks.
yeah. And it seems to me that a lot of what we think we are recycling isn't actually being recycled. It's just being shipped across the planet, like you said, and dumped somewhere else to become someone else's problem. So, it's we only live on one planet. So why don't we all look after it instead of making our mess someone else's problem? Just
Totally agree. Which brings us really nicely onto that third point, which is making your clothes last, keeping them out of landfill, keeping them going as long as possible. But I think part of the problem is, well, one, we don't really value our clothes in the first place because you can buy a top for less than a cup of coffee, basically. And two, we've lost the art of repairing.
yes.
So, in a recent survey, 60% of adults did not know how to sew a button on. So if you
How
have a
can that, how
shirt,
is that possible? It's just like common sense. What is there not to understand? Like thread, needle, button,
I know, but I
sew.
guess if you've never done that, or nobody's ever taught you how to do that, then for some people, if a button's come off a shirt, that is the end of the line for them. They will go and buy a new shirt. Whereas you and I know it's a pretty simple thing, and hello, internet. There is a YouTube video for pretty much anything you want to do these days.
Yeah,
So you can find the solution, but many people choose not to. So I always say if you have any level of skill, or if you're the person in your family that everyone goes to say, can you just take this up or can you just fix this rip? The most valuable thing you can do is teach somebody else how to do that.
yeah, yeah, that's so true. Yeah. And I think the idea of taking something that's you've been in your wardrobe a long time and just pepping it up somehow, like maybe just changing the color of the buttons on a shirt or adding like what's the word I'm trying to look, a bit of trim to a collar or just to make it a little bit different than it was is
Yeah.
it's a really fun thing to do as well. And it's because I think fundamentally most humans are creative in some way.
Mm.
And so I think a lot of us don't get to be creative because of whatever job people might have or how much time they may or may not have, when they're not parenting or commuting or doing their job. But I think it's a really great outlet for people's creativity to play with their clothes and what they're wearing.
I always say, and you're right, um, I think everybody at some point in their life should make an item of clothing.
Yeah,
Growing right from, cutting out the pattern pieces to putting it together to doing all of the fittings, just to understand the level of skill that's required for that. And then once you've been through that process, because I went through it myself, because every time I watch the sewing bee, I'm like, oh, I really
yeah,
want to be this good at sewing. So I get all enthusiastic about it. Like, right, this is a skill I'm gonna learn.
yeah,
So I decided I was going to make myself a maxi dress. Well, the fabric and the thread and the pattern cost £80.
yeah,
It then took me the best part of a year to figure out how to do it and to sew it and put it all together. But the point of that exercise is it's showing you actually the true cost of clothing, that how can it possibly be right that you can buy a brand new dress for under a tenner? You can
yeah,
get the fabric for that.
exactly.
And it's
Yeah,
also teaching you that there's a skill associated with it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know if you've ever had anything tailor made for you, but if you go to someone and say, "Can you design me an outfit and make it?" You're not going to expect to pay 80 quid for that, are you? It's because you are buying their expertise and their creativity and yeah, they're just their whole artistry it's an art, isn't it? So so as you say, why we expect to go into a shop and pay a tenner for a dress or 20 quid for a jacket, which God knows how much work takes into making a jacket, like mind boggling to me. But yeah, it's a good reminder to think about where does this all come from. A bit like, I don't know if viewers or listeners do the same as me, but when you go shopping for food, like, well, where does this come from and where has it been grown and how has it got here? All those kind of issues are really worth thinking about because,
Definitely, definitely. And that's just reminded me, I was reading a book the other day, and the author said, again, to help us choose better, we we might be better off if we put as much time and effort and consideration into our everyday clothes as we did with our wedding outfit. Because if you think about the Pinterest boards you put together, we trawl all the shops, you try loads of things, you have it fitted perfectly, and it's just going to be worn for most people for one day. So if we put even half of that energy into choosing the things that we wear day in, day out, that's got to make us better shoppers, surely.
yeah, yeah, that's very true. Yeah, I think that's a really good thought to end on, Becky. Thank you so much for coming on. And if you're watching or listening and you're intrigued by what Becky does and you want to know if you can get some help from her, then I will put her details in the show notes. So please do contact her. She's on Instagram as well. So as I say, I'll put them all in the show notes. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on, Becky. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for
And
having
if you've
me.
watched this and you're listening to it and you like it, like and subscribe and tell your friends. So I'll see you in the next episode. Take care. Bye.